Today, we uncover the 7 jam brands the UK should be warning about, not because they're illegal, not because they'll make headlines, but because they don't make headlines, all while they quietly turn one of our centuries-old staples into something unrecognizable. Jam, the real stuff, is supposed to be just fruit and sugar. That's it. You take ripe berries, add sugar, cook it down, and you've got a preserve that's been around for centuries. But what happens when real fruit lowers their profits and manufacturers start cutting corners? They keep the label, they keep the shelf space, but the contents of the jar is becoming something else entirely. Today's typical supermarket jam is no longer made the way it used to be. You'd think you're buying strawberries and sugar. Well, you're actually getting a gel. A sweetened simulation made mostly of glucose-fructose syrup, pectin, acids, and the barely legal minimum of fruit. Some jars contain just 35% fruit. The rest of the jar is topped up with texture, flavoring, and illusion, and it's all perfectly legal. These aren't fringe products. They're the top-selling brands, the family favorites. There's one in every home, hiding behind words like traditional and original recipe while quietly redefining what jam means to an entire generation. So in this video, we're not just pointing fingers, we're pulling back the curtain. We've gone through the labels, checked the fruit percentages, and read the fine print they're hoping you'll ignore. The 7 brands we're about to show you aren't just bad jam. They're evidence of how a once simple food can be slowly hollowed out until there's almost nothing left. If you think that's just about jam, think again. This is what's happening across the board in everything we used to take for granted. But today, we reveal the truth about modern jam, the 7 brands furthest from what they claim to be, and the couple that still remember how it's supposed to be done.
Number 1. Hartley's Strawberry Jam, the benchmark of how low the bar has dropped. We're starting with Hartley's not because it's the worst jam in Britain, but because it's the most normal. This is the one that shows up in school canteens, on hotel buffets, in corner shops, and on the weekly grocery shop without a second thought. It's everywhere, and it's exactly that familiarity that makes it dangerous. Hartley's isn't trying to be gourmet. It's not trying to fool you with artisan packaging or rustic language. It's presenting itself as straightforward, honest jam. But turn the jar around and look closer. Just 37% fruit. That's barely above the UK's legal minimum. The rest, glucose-fructose syrup, sugar, pectin, citric acid, maybe a preservative or two. And somehow, this is what most people now think jam is supposed to be. There's no texture of cooked-down fruit, no chunks, no softness, just a thick, smooth, bouncy spread that's been engineered to behave like jelly. Open a jar in December. Open one in July. It'll look and taste identical. That consistency isn't the result of great fruit or careful cooking. It's the result of a formula. A product designed to be cheap to make and sweet enough to keep people from asking questions. And that's the real issue here. Hartley's has become the default, the baseline, the jam that defines the category. But what it's actually done is drag the entire standard downward. When people grow up eating this, better jam starts to seem weird. A jar with 60% fruit and no added syrup suddenly tastes less sweet. A looser set from natural pectin feels like something's gone wrong. Meanwhile, everything else on the shelf begins to imitate Hartley's, not because it's good, but because it's safe, recognizable, profitable. So, no, Hartley's isn't a scandal. It's not hiding anything. It's just showing us exactly how far we've let this product drift, and how easily something cheap and engineered can become the national reference point. It's not the worst jam in Britain, but it might be the most influential, and that makes it the most dangerous. Number 2. Tesco Strawberry Jam, when cheap, becomes cheaper than fruit. If Hartley's is the baseline, Tesco Strawberry Jam shows us what happens when you have no shame. This isn't about nostalgia or branding, it's about cost. This is Tesco's budget range jam, the one you get when price is the only factor. And what's inside is the logical conclusion of cutting corners. A jar of thickened sugar gel dressed up with just enough fruit to keep it legal. Any lower and they'd have to label it as a fruit spreads or drop the word jam entirely. The rest is mostly glucose fructose syrup. That's not just a cheaper sweetener than sugar, it's also a way to stretch ingredients further while keeping the same texture. Add a splash of water, a hit of industrial pectin, some acid to sharpen the flavour, and you've got something that looks like jam, spreads like jam, but has barely anything to do with fruit. And yet it sells, because the price point is unbeatable. This is a jar that might cost 39p or 45p, cheaper than a loaf of bread. At that price, no one expects luxury. But what they don't realise is they're not just compromising on flavour, they're getting a product that was never really jam to begin with. It's a sugar-based spread that borrows the name. Here's the trick. As long as it sets like jam and tastes like Haribo, most shoppers won't question it. But this kind of product reshapes consumer expectations. When jam becomes something that can be made without real commitment to fruit, it trains people to accept less, and it pushes other brands to cut corners just to compete. Tesco strawberry jam isn't pretending to be premium, but that's exactly the loophole. Because by hiding behind its budget label, it gets away with doing the absolute minimum. The result isn't just a bad jar of jam, it's a product that lowers the bar for everyone else. When price wins, quality loses, and Stockwell is proof of how fast that race to the bottom can go.
Number 3. Jaws Strawberry Jam.
Wrapped in tradition, built like a budget brand. At first glance, Dwes doesn't seem like it belongs on this list. It doesn't sit on the bottom shelf. It doesn't scream value range. The packaging leans into heritage, script fonts, nostalgic branding, and words like established 1881. It positions itself as a British classic, a family-owned business that's been doing things the right way for a century. But turn the jar around and the story falls apart fast. Dewars Strawberry Jam contains just 35% fruit, the same legal minimum as the cheapest own brands. So what's the first ingredient? Glucose fructose syrup, then sugar, then water. You have to read a third of the way down the ingredients list before you even get to the strawberries, and the rest is what you'd expect from any cheap industrial jam. Pectin to force the gel, citric acid to boost the flavour, and just enough colour to make the whole thing look berry rich. There's nothing inherently wrong with companies streamlining production, but Dwes' problem isn't just what's in the jar, it's the disconnect between image and reality. This is a brand that leans on the language of tradition while producing jam that's built to formula, not flavour. It gives the impression of old-school quality while using the same shortcuts as the cheapest options in the aisle. And that mismatch matters because branding influences trust. When people see family-owned or since 1881, they assume care, craft, and ingredients that reflect that legacy. Dwes trades on that assumption, then delivers a product that's almost indistinguishable from Tesco Value or Asda Just Essentials. What's worse is how that illusion impacts perception. If a trusted brand like Dwes is using glucose fructose syrup, it starts to look normal. If a legacy jam is built more on sugar and syrup than fruit, then that becomes the industry default. We stop associating heritage with quality and start associating it with nostalgia that no longer reflects the contents. Dwes doesn't need to be this way. With its history and reach, it could lead the charge in making proper jam accessible again. Instead, it uses the past as camouflage, and that's why it earns a spot on this list, not for being the cheapest, but for pretending to be something better.
Number 4. Shoot no added sugar jam, extra jam, when healthier means even worse. Not all bad jam comes from cutting costs. Some of it comes from trying to sell you something healthier. And in the case of Stute's no sugar added jam, the result isn't just disappointing, it's a case study in how good intentions can go completely off track. At first glance, it sounds like a smart alternative. No sugar added, lower calories, marketed as diabetic friendly. It's the kind of product that gives off the impression of being better for you, maybe even more natural. But here's the catch. When you take sugar out of jam, you're not left with fruit. You're left with a structural problem, because sugar isn't just there for sweetness, it's what gives jam its body.
its set, and its shelf life. So how does Stute replace that? With sorbitol, a sugar alcohol that mimics sweetness, but comes with a whole new set of compromises. Sorbitol isn't a naturally occurring fruit ingredient. It's an industrially produced sweetener that can cause digestive issues when consumed in large quantities. And it's listed right at the top of the ingredients, above the fruit itself. That brings us to the second issue. Despite being marketed as fruit-forward, Stute's jam still contains just around 45% fruit, not even close to the levels found in genuinely high-quality preservations. And because it doesn't use sugar, it has to lean harder on gelling agents, acidity regulators, and preservatives to hold everything together and stretch shelf life. What you're left with is something that looks like jam, but tastes more like artificially sweetened jelly, firmer, flatter, and oddly medicinal. This is what happens when marketing gets ahead of food integrity. In the rush to appear healthier, the product becomes even further removed than the traditional thing. No sugar, but also no richness, no softness, and no flavor payoff. Just a lab-built replacement designed to tick boxes. The problem here isn't just about one brand. It's the broader idea that food can be improved by taking away key ingredients and substituting them with additives and still calling it the same thing. Stute's no sugar added jam may cater to a niche, but for everyone else, it's a reminder. Not everything labeled better for you is better food.
Number 5. Asda Just Essentials Strawberry Jam, the budget excuse to make Frankenstein's spread. By now, most people recognize Asda's Just Essentials range. It's bright, it's simple, and it's designed to feel helpful, like the supermarket's doing you a favor. The packaging leans into transparency. No fancy fonts, no over-promising, just plain labels and bold colors that scream, "We're keeping it real." But inside that stripped-back design is a jar of jam that's just as manipulated, engineered, and hollowed out as anything else on this list. There's a trick in how budget supermarket ranges operate. They're presented as honest alternatives. No frills, no spin, just basic food at a basic price. And to some extent that's true, but the simplicity of the branding encourages people not to look too closely. When a product looks plain, people assume it must also be straightforward inside. That's the illusion, because in reality, these ranges often use the same formulations, the same shortcuts, and the same low-fruit tricks as any other bottom-tier product. They're just packaged to look more virtuous. Asda's Just Essentials jam is a perfect example of how visual trust can mask ingredient truth. It's not the branding that's dishonest, it's how that branding makes you lower your guard. And in today's food landscape, that's a bigger problem than it looks.
Number 6. Dewar's Mixed Fruit. When mixed means mostly filler. When a jam label says mixed fruit, you'd be forgiven for expecting something a little special. Raspberries, blackberries, maybe a blend of vibrant summer fruits. But what if mixed actually meant mostly apple and rhubarb? That's exactly what's happening with Dewar's Mixed Fruit Jam, a product that uses the idea of variety to sneak in cheaper, lower flavor ingredients under the radar. The front of the jar shows a burst of colorful berries. The label suggests richness, but flip it around and the ingredients tell a very different story. Apple, plum, and rhubarb make up the bulk of the fruit content, all inexpensive, high-pectin fruits that stretch volume without adding much flavor. Actual berries, sometimes not even named. The fruit percentage is still just 35%, and yet it manages to feel even less substantial than a single fruit jam. To top it off, Dewar's adds anthocyanin, a natural coloring agent, to deepen the red tone and make it look like it's packed with berries. It's a visual illusion. What seems bold and juicy is mostly sweetened filler, color-adjusted to give the impression of richness. This is less about sweetness or cost and more about deception by omission. Mixed fruit should mean balance, not dilution. But in this case, It's a label used to hide the fact that the jar contains very little of what it's trying to look like. It's not jam, it's theatre. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Number 7. Sainsbury's Stamford Street Co. Watered down in every way. Sainsbury's budget tier jam doesn't just cut corners, it waters them down, literally. Unlike most jams that at least pretend to be fruit and sugar, this one lists water as a key ingredient, and that tells you everything you need to know. With only 35% fruit, the legal minimum, and glucose-fructose syrup carrying the bulk of the sweetness, the addition of water is a red flag. It's there to bulk out volume, reduce costs, and make